Okay, I'm back. This is my second YouTube video. I watched the first one yesterday while I was in the basement pedaling on my bicycle. It was a rainy day. Today's a beautiful day. So I watched the first one back, and of course YouTube immediately then followed my short video with similar content. Content about retiring early, transitioning from a working life. And I'm going to say my video was different. And in the obvious ways, man, these videos are really good. You've got a lot to look at and watch, and the quality is spectacular. The editing is good. The audio is good. The graphs are better. But they're different in another way I want to speak to. And there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. I want to be clear. Mine's just a bit different. How is it different? Well, it's about what I am doing and what I'm not doing, and about what they're doing. So there's a reason that these other videos have such high quality. It's because they have staff and expensive equipment and better microphones and editing and research. I do all my own stunts. All these videos are mine. Every bit of footage you're going to see is something that I took. And the thoughts here I'm giving you are my own. I will steal a page. This is not financial advice. I'm not giving you any guidance. I am not your fiduciary. If you want a fiduciary, you should go hire one and pay them. I'm not selling anything. I'm not selling financial services. I'm not selling counseling services. I'm not selling advice. I'm not selling an ebook. I'm not selling a book on how to sell your house or how to move. I'm not selling a VPN. I'm not selling anything. And I think that's going to color the nature of my discussion just a little bit. It really came to mind as I watched some of these other videos. Again, they're not bad advice, they're not bad, but they're definitely colored by the fact that they're selling something. And it's fascinating to watch how this works, in that you can see what you get with top of funnel then is these great videos that have hope and promise, hope of early retirement. You too can retire. And as they roll up, you'll see you can retire on $10 million. Seems obvious. You can retire on $5 million. You can retire on $2 million. What does a $1 million retirement look like? It's more or less a binary search here. And the pitch is pretty good. The pitch goes like this. It's basically, you can get what you want. And there are two obstacles. And I'm going to tell you what those obstacles are in a minute, but most importantly, I'm going to tell you how you can overcome those two obstacles. And don't worry, we're going to get where you want to go. And what are the two obstacles? Well, it's really one. It's fear. What are you afraid of? What is it that's going to be dangerous about this big step? The person talking to you on YouTube is going to help you with that fear, because with that fear is a very reasonable problem of complexity and ignorance. And nobody wants to be accountable to their spouse for stepping into a complicated situation and being too brave and making a giant mistake. That's a deep fear. And if nothing else, these services will absolve you of your own mistakes. And when things go badly, and you and your spouse or your other dependents, people around you that were counting on you, when things go badly, if you have a fiduciary, you can point to that fiduciary and say, I followed their advice. They're a professional. This is a wonderful thing to sell. It's absolution. I'm not selling you anything. I'm not selling you advice, not selling you absolution, not selling you a relief from your own decision making. I'm here to walk through it with you. How does that affect my guidance? Well, let's talk about an example question. And the example question is, how do you know it's time to retire? Well, let's just walk through a really simple bit of math. And then, because I'm on a bicycle, it won't get complicated, I promise. But start with a basic bit of math. Bill Bengen, really smart guy, came up with something that's very marketable and very clear, 4% rule. Yeah, it's actually 4.1. He's got some nice videos now where he's interviewed and he's talking about maybe it's 4.7. Let's just take the 4% rule as a jumping off point. How might you apply this? Well, if you turn 4% upside down, 5th grade math, you get 1/25th. And so if you need 4% to live on in a way that you're satisfied with, take your spending, multiply it by 25, and you're going to get a number, a pretty big number, 25 times your annual spending. If you had that much money and you had a 30-year retirement, you could be really sure that you're going to make it, really sure that you're going to make it. And that's pretty easy math. How do we build an entire advisory industry around that math? Well, hold on while I cross the street and then we'll find out. So how do you make an entire industry out of a simple number like 4% or 1/25th? Well, for starters, getting that number was not easy. You had to do a whole bunch of complicated math and back testing against historical returns and inflation and portfolio mixes to find that number. We're going to talk about that in a second. And then also there's a bunch of complexity when you go to look at how do I apply this to my situation. And I'm going to start with that because I made a few mistakes in applying this number. As I've hinted at before, I've been thinking about retirement since I started work, and I found some old gold notes that I had from when I was a fresh college graduate, and they included beginning to save money even on a very meager salary. And I didn't exactly know what I would need, but I knew I would need to be self-sufficient and I'd have other things in my life to buy. And so saving money, living below my means became part of my early habit. What mistakes did I make? Well, when projecting what I would need to retire, I took my current living expenses and then I grossed up. I added the taxes that I was currently paying, and then I multiplied by 25. There are two mistakes in this that led to a higher number than I think I now need. One was that I set these targets when I had 2 kids at home, and kids are expensive. Soccer and dance and clubs, and of course they had to travel with us anywhere we went. They didn't have jobs, so Susan and I are paying for all this stuff, and it's expensive, and that rolled into my number. So my actual spending needs for a 2-person household, I now believe, are much lower than what I had projected. We'll detail that later. The other mistake was grossing up my taxes the way I did, because I took my expenses and I figured my average tax rate at the time was something like 20%. In looking at how I was going to generate income going forward, percent turns out to be too high. Why? Well, because a lot of the spending I'm going to be doing is coming from a taxable account where the gains are capital gains and where the basis, that's the amount that I invested initially, is still pretty high. And so you take the total amount, you subtract your original investment, the basis, and that's your taxable amount. And then you're only paying 15 or 20% on that. And you're only paying 15 or 20% after a pretty substantial deductible. And so there's no way I'm going to be paying 20% tax. So I went through and I redid it, and I came out with a projection, I believe, of 17% average tax rate. That's a really big difference if you play out those numbers. So my living expenses are lower, and my tax burden is not as bad as I thought. Now, these were 2 happy errors to find. I also found some things that weren't so great, like by retiring at 55, of course, it's not a shock. I got to pay for health care myself. For the two of us, it's about $1,500 per month right now. So I need to add that to my expense because my employer was subsidizing me pretty handily there. It was part of my income. I found offsetting errors, mostly that ended up net in my favor, where I had overestimated the amount of money I think I need. I had overestimated my long-term tax burden. I had underestimated a few expenses. And so the overall point here is that as you look at your retirement and you look at something, it starts out being pretty simple, like the 4% rule. Well, a lot of math went into that 4% rule, but then even when you apply it, you're going to dive into a whole bunch of complexity on tax nuances. And do you pay the net investment income tax, or is a Roth conversion a good idea, and how much? And how much taxes will I pay over the long term? All these things you can start to get complicated, and that's how you build an industry, is you give people good guidance on how to interpret all this stuff. And maybe that guidance is worth paying for if you're not interested in figuring it out yourself. And if you find a lot of utility in having a, well, I'll just call it a scapegoat if things go wrong. This other end of the 4% rule I want to talk about for a minute. Okay, applying it to your personal situation might be trickier than it looks like initially. Is 4% the right rule? Turns out, if you think about this, that's also a complicated question. How did he come at this 4% rule? Well, again, he did back testing on a portfolio of stocks and bonds that he thought would be good to look at. And he did look at different portfolios, but 4% rule was meant to give you a very safe estimate. In his original back testing, I think he's quoted recently as saying that out of the 400 different tests he ran, mostly manual. I mean, this is in the early mid-80s, computers were new, but only one of them failed, meaning they ran out of money during this period. The other 399 exited the earth with money in the bank. And many of them, of course, because they took this very safe path, had a lot of money in the bank. And I'm riding my bike along here trying to make this audio recording without too much noise for you. But I want to say we're looking at a really long period of time of relying on a portfolio for income. There's some implications to that I've been thinking about. A 30 or 40 year retirement, that's history. That's a long span of time. I've only seen a little bit of my own history over the last 55 years, maybe paid attention for 30 of those years. And so I talked last time, I mentioned something and I got a note, and I really appreciate the person who called me out on this. I said the biggest risk I face is sequence of returns risk. And I tried to kind of talk about what that was in sort of intuitive terms, not really math. But the person said, wait a minute, that's the biggest risk? And of course, immediately I'm embarrassed because they're absolutely right. Biggest is an overstretch for sure. Like the biggest risk is the 100% probability that I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm riding my bicycle while trying not to get hit by cars and at the same time trying to get healthy. Well, it's certainly good to be healthy and exercise, maintain your weight, keep your blood pressure down, but we're going to die. Hopefully I won't get smashed by a car. And so I think it's important to keep this perspective. Of course, if you're dead, money doesn't matter. But it's morbid, but it's true. If you're alive, it does matter. But really then, as you're thinking about it, I think, what's the probability they're going to be alive and in need of extra spending when you're 95? Is that probability or likelihood lower than the probability that you've run out of money and that nobody will help you? Well, there's a nice little calculator that can help you with this. Rich, broke, or dead. And it lays out the odds of these three things. Now, of course, again, the dead one is only semi-relevant because if you're dead, you don't care too much about money. You don't care about anything. And so money will matter. Oh, I gotta go. If you're alive and you don't have any. So I'm not saying money doesn't matter. And I'm not advising you to be reckless and make a risky decision. But the comment was absolutely right. I think health is a bigger problem than running out of money. I think the impact on being miserable through being unhealthy is much higher than being miserable because you can't subscribe to Cinemax. I'm not selling Cinemax. So those are my thoughts for the day. Why is there an industry around retirement and guidance? Where does it get complicated? What are some of the mistakes I made? In my next video, I'm going to talk about a big decision that we're in the middle of. My goal overall here was to kind of bring you up to speed on my thinking and some of the things that got me to the point where I stepped off the working treadmill, and some of the high-level thinking and obsessive rat-holing and analysis I've done to convince myself that this is reasonably safe, at least as safe as riding a bicycle in Cambridge. Maybe not as safe as having everything in treasuries. But now I think we'll take some further dips into the past as we keep talking, but I want to, in my next video, talk about a current decision my wife and I are thinking deeply about and how we're considering the pros and cons, and share with you our process in the event that you're thinking about a similar transition. Anyway, like, subscribe, ask me questions in DMs or comments. I'll try to respond quickly, and I do appreciate that thought. Sequence of returns risk is the financial one, but there are others. Thank you for that. Next time. That's very nice. Yes. Cheers.